From the inside trip to the high tripod passing to the rear naked choke finish. Today we're going to be diving into the match between Jozef Chen and Elijah Dorsey. Now we're not going to spend too much time on the stand-up portion, because to be honest, I don't feel too qualified to talk about it. But for whatever reason, when Jozef gets a left side underhook, he seems to like the inside trip. And I think this is very intentional.
And on the other side, you go inside trip.
Yeah. Okay. He goes other side. I think let's play this game.
Let's go.
So again, I'm not sure why that left underhook means inside trip, but maybe after Jozef beats Nicky Ryan to win the million.
Joe Chen's gonna smoke him.
I don't know. We can have another conversation with him and Dima to discuss these tactics. Now we've made it to the ground where I feel much more qualified to speak. And as Jozef stands up from the closed guard, Elijah takes this scoop grip and we all know what's coming next. Now K-guard is effective because with the top player pressuring forward, it can be a bit congested for the bottom player to pummel in their foot as a frame, but it's much easier for them to pummel their knee to the inside, allowing them to use their knee and shin to frame against the hip of their opponent, effectively manage the distance and go into their attacks. But as Elijah's trying to drop his knee to the inside, Jozef kind of uses his armpit to slow that leg down, as he brings his hips forward, preventing Elijah's knee from taking that inside space, and it's actually Jozef who gets his knee to the hip of Elijah. So step one is we need to prevent the attacker from getting their knee inside. This means that we've effectively beaten our opponent's legs, and therefore they can no longer use their legs to frame against us and prevent us from pressuring forward. Now, if we were to think about this just through the lens of guard passing, once we beat our opponent's legs, we don't run away from them, we go towards them to solidify our pin. It's the whole point of beating their legs in the first place, because this gives us the ability to go towards them effectively. So from this specific situation of K-guard, if we get our knee to the inside to beat our opponent's legs, but then we decide to run away, it doesn't make sense when we look at it through the lens of guard passing. After we beat the legs, we should be looking to close distance and solidify the pin. So after getting past Elijah's legs, Jozef backsteps and sinks his weight down, going towards his opponent, which kind of suffocates Elijah's hook and prevents it from entangling Jozef's legs. But now the threat is Elijah's going to use this leg to enter into cross ashi.
So I want you to think about this. Paso high steps. I grab the ankle, I pull my head in, and make that leg transition.
So Elijah's looking to chop this leg in between Jozef's to enter into cross ashi, but Jozef's already monitoring that leg to prevent the entry, and he almost follows up this beautiful defensive cycle with a guard pass, but Elijah's able to recover to close guard. If you've been doing jiu-jitsu for a little while, you probably heard something along the lines of, man, that guy felt like he was one step ahead of me the whole time. And this defensive sequence by Jozef is the perfect representation of that.
This guy's good.
We can see this happening from a lot of different situations, but it seems to boil down to the idea that you first beat the guard player's legs, which gives you the ability to come towards them and solidify your pin. Now as we hop back into the match, Jozef again finds himself trying to stand up to open the closed guard of Elijah. But this time Elijah gets control over both of Jozef's legs and threatens to sweep him backwards.
Whatever problems that you have being knocked backwards as you stand up into vertical posture are insignificant with the problems of being pulled forwards. You can be pulled forward into submissions. When they sweep you backwards, there's no body connection. Okay, this is a very important point. So all of the forward sweeps involve body connection that doubles the amount of trouble you get put into. Backward sweeps, very little body connection. It's just leg connection. Because there's no body connection, it's pretty easy for you to prevent your opponent from actually scoring on you.
So it took a little while, but Jozef was finally able to get out of the closed guard and start to work his passing. And as Elijah tries to stand up, Jozef takes an underhook and puts his head on the far side, settling in to start to work his high tripod guard passing. This is what we came to see. Now the basic idea behind it is with an underhook on one side and his head on the other side, Jozef's able to effectively pin Elijah's back to the mat while he works to pummel his legs. And you can see Jozef's not able to pass right away, and it's a bit of a battle going from side to side. So when trying to develop this skill, I think a big part of it is just maintaining this position and keeping the bottom player flat on their back. So to practice it, it might make sense to play what DeAndre calls a maintenance game, where you just try to maintain a certain condition for as long as possible.
You can't maintain conditions, you need to work on your capacity.
Right.
We play a continuous game. In this case, it'll be a continuous game for the offensive player of trying to maintain the conditions.
Now, Jozef's known for doing his homework, but Elijah definitely did his homework as well. And to counter this high tripod passing, you can see Elijah bringing his right leg across to hook onto the leg of Jozef.
I've been playing this tripod floating pass game for a long time, like over 20 years now. And to this day, this is the counter that gives me the most problems. His bottom leg is essentially pinned, but he can pass his foot below his.
Now, I think the idea behind this counter is that in order for the bottom player to get their back off the mat and do what's called a forward shift, they need 2 butterfly hooks in place. If they have just 1 butterfly hook, it's more difficult for them to hit that forward shift, and it's more likely the top player can pin them to the mat while they work to complete the guard pass.
If we were double butterfly hooks, then the forward shift is a more legitimate concern. But when I have one already cleared, it's going to be very hard, try forward shift me. It's going to be very hard for him to do so.
So by bringing his right foot across, Elijah is essentially trying to create a situation where he has 2 butterfly hooks.
And with that control, he can extend his legs and reposition my knee, and that drags my head and shoulders south on his body, and now he can use that against me.
The bottom player's goal is to lift the top player, because by doing so, the top player's control over the head and shoulders is compromised. Now the knees do a good job of pushing, but it's the feet that lift us. So Elijah's constantly looking to recover into a situation where he has 2 feet connected to Jozef so he can lift effectively. And Jozef is constantly creating a situation where he's fighting 1 lifting leg instead of 2, which creates a much more stable position for Jozef. So when Elijah brings his second hook across to connect to Jozef's leg, he wants to connect above the knee so he can lift Jozef effectively. But Jozef immediately pummels his knee over the shin of Elijah, killing Elijah's ability to lift with that second leg.
Pull my knee, pummel over the toes, and now hide my knee.
So Jozef is in a very structured and stable position, fighting only 1 lifting leg of Elijah. And when Elijah tries to utilize that weak lifting force with only 1 leg, Jozef is able to take advantage of that and pass the guard. Now we've already established that when it comes to guard passing, we want to get past our opponent's legs so we can go towards them and solidify our pin. But if we try to secure the pin by just controlling the hips, our opponent still has a decent ability to move. But on the flip side, if we just focus on controlling the head and shoulders, our pin is also unstable. So the most secure pin is going to be one where you control both the hips and shoulders, which makes it very difficult for your opponent to rotate. And if we can hold our opponent flat, it's going to be much easier for us to secure the pin. Now, the beautiful thing about high tripod guard passing is you control your opponent's head and shoulders before you pass their legs. So once we pass the legs, if our goal is to secure a good pin, we should focus on controlling their hips, which is very hard to do if you pass directly to mount.
If I go straight to mount, there's potentially a turtle straight up.
So instead of just going directly to mount, Jozef stops in what's called a shin mount, which does a great job at controlling your opponent's hips. So now Jozef has successfully passed the guard into a secure pin. But in order to submit our opponent, we're likely going to have to progress to a more traditional form of mount. So the question becomes, when is the appropriate time to do this? Now, what we need to consider is we're currently controlling our opponent's hips and shoulders, which allows us to keep them flat on the mat. And a person who is flat on the mat is much easier to pin. But when we decide to mount, we're sacrificing control of their hips, which makes it harder for us to hold their back flat on the mat and thus harder to pin them. Now, another way we can make someone more vulnerable to pins is by putting them in a stable state of extension. We can see here Jozef functionally has an underhook here, but Elijah is relatively contracted with his elbow close to his side, compared to a situation like this where the bottom player has their elbows well above the line of their shoulder. But by going to that shin mount and controlling the hips, Jozef is relying on keeping Elijah flat on the mat to secure his pin, until he's able to walk this arm up into a state of extension. Once we have extension, it makes sense to start thinking about transitioning to more traditional forms of mount, which does allow the bottom player to turn, but we're no longer relying on keeping our opponent flat to secure the pin. We're relying on that extension. They can still turn when they're extended, but it prevents them from building height, which allows the attacker to transition into submissions or other forms of pin.
If we do really start to flatten them out, from this position, I could elect to step here. Yeah, exactly, but there's no ability to build height now.
Now, I actually got to speak with Greg Sodders from Standard Jiu-Jitsu while I was editing this video, and he had a huge influence on my analysis of this match. And one of the things he said was clearing your feet from the guard is useful only once extension has occurred. This is a very simple and well-worded framework to think about when you're pinning your opponent. So shout out to Greg, thank you for all your help in analyzing this match. And as we hop back in, Jozef chair sits and opportunistically traps the arm as he takes the back. Now from the back, a huge part of the battle is going to be the grip fight, and the defender is likely going to have a strong grip on the strangle arm. And as the attacker, our goal is to weaken the grip they have on our strangle arm so we can threaten and ultimately finish a rear naked choke. Now to weaken their grip on our strangle arm, we can do so at the wrist or the elbow. Now I think the more common approaches involve attacking the structure of our opponent's wrist to ultimately weaken the grip they have on our strangle arm and allow us to threaten the rear naked choke. But what I don't see a lot of people talking about is how to manipulate elbow position to achieve this same result. If the defender has their elbow higher than their wrist, then if they use a C grip which incorporates their thumb, it's going to be a very strong and structured grip. However, if their elbow is lower than their wrist, then the C grip would actually be very structurally weak, and it would be much more structurally sound for them to switch to a grip without their thumb, that the jiu-jitsu world calls a monkey grip. So if we're attacking a rear naked choke and the defender's using a C grip with their thumb, that grip is only effective if their elbow is higher than their wrist. But if we push their elbow down, now that grip becomes ineffective. And now with their elbow lower than their wrist, it makes sense for them to switch to a monkey grip. And as they make that transition, it can be a good opportunity for us to sink in the rear naked choke. Another thing that Greg said to me is every grip has a function and a limit. This C grip from the defender is very strong, but if we're able to walk our strangle arm up towards our opponent's shoulder, we begin to push the limits of this grip.
But the primary defensive hand has a weakness. It has an inability to follow the hand beyond a certain point.
So by pushing our opponent's defensive grip to its mobility limit, it's basically on the verge of breaking. And all it requires is a slight compromise of elbow position, and it forces the defender to switch their grip. So when Jozef has a strangle arm all the way up by the shoulder of Elijah, it's out of the range for Elijah to use a C grip. So what he would like to do is take a monkey grip on the strangle arm of Jozef. But in order for this monkey grip to be structurally sound, he needs his elbow below his wrist. So the whole time Jozef is pulling out his underhook, he's also lifting the elbow of Elijah, which makes it impossible for Elijah to switch to that monkey grip, and it forces him to use a C grip. And we're already beyond the mobility limit of a C grip. And the result is Elijah's not even able to touch the strangle arm of Jozef. And then Jozef goes to the wrist before locking up a full rear naked choke for the win. Now again, our ultimate goal as the attacker is just to compromise their grip on our strangle arm. And I think a lot of people focus solely on the wrist as a way to achieve this. And this can definitely be effective, but it can also lead to a bit of a struggle. And seeing Jozef play between compromising the elbow and the wrist before locking up a clean rear naked choke really opened up my eyes to seeing creative ways we can go about compromising our opponent's grip on our strangle arm. Now, if you're interested in more, I created this website called the Outlier Database with the goal of making your jiu-jitsu studying as efficient as possible. And for this week, I made the match between Jozef and Elijah free, so you can go through all the notes I took for this match. And if you decide to become a paid member, you can see all of the resources that I've referenced throughout this video as well. And with the membership, we're currently including access to my $97 instructional for free, as well as a Discord and the first AI chatbot. And on top of that, if you're lucky enough to be one of the first 2,000 people to sign up, you're going to be grandfathered in to the $20 rate for the duration of your subscription. So if you're interested in the tool I use to make all my videos, check the link down in the description. And thanks again to Joseph and all the competitors who go out there and put it all on the line so we can learn from you. Thanks to Dima for coaching. Thanks to Greg for helping me analyze this match. Thanks to COVID for the study time. And of course, thank you, Joseph's mom. I hope you enjoyed the video.
My mom loved your video.
Oh, nice.
My mom was like, "This video is so amazing." It's like, my mom was like, "Can you please ask him to do this for all your matches?" I'm like, "Mom, that's not how it works." But she's like, "He makes me understand everything." I'm like, "Great, I'm glad you like it."
That might go in this video.